Hello and welcome to my channel or welcome back to my channel. Today I will be sharing with you NCERT Class 9 History Section 1 Chapter 1 The French Revolution by Lakshin Berry. Now we begin on the 14th of July 1789. Paris is in a state of alarm. The city was tense due to the king's decision to deploy troops. Rumors spread that the army would fire on citizens. Formation of a people's militia. Now, to counter this deployment, around 7,000 men and women gathered at the town hall, where they decided to form a militia and searched government buildings for weapons. After which, they stormed the Bastille. A large group marched towards the Bastille, a fortress prison in the eastern Paris. They believed it contained stockpiled ammunition. Now, to gather ammunition, they stormed the Bastille, a fortress prison, where in the fight the commander of the Bastille was killed. Now, usually the person in charge of a prison is known as a warden, but for the Bastille it was the commander. The commander of the Bastille was killed and seven prisoners were freed. The Bastille was a symbol of the king's oppressive rule and was demolished. Its stones were sold as souvenirs. Here is the Bastille in this image. Continued unrest in Paris and the countryside. Now, there was unrest in Paris as well as the countryside. Riots continued in the following days, primarily due to the high price of bread, which was the staple food for most of the people. Historical significance. Now, the historical significance of this event was that it started the revolution. It kick-started the revolution in a sense. Though unanticipated at the time, it eventually led to the execution of the king. Now, it ultimately led to the death of the king by the guillotine by the people, which was not quite expected at the time. Now, we will look at a summary of the economic and social conditions throughout the years of 1774 and 1789. Accession of Louis the 16th, 1774. Louis the 16th of the Bourbon family became king at 20 years old. He was married to the Austrian princess Marie Antoinette. He inherited an empty treasury due to the prolonged wars and extravagant spending at Versailles. Now, what this means is that when he became king, he did not come into much money, as most of the wealth had been previously spent in extravagant parties and prolonged wars. Now, France was in a financial crisis. France supported the American colonies against Britain, adding over a billion livres to its debt. Now, livre was the currency at the time. The total debt exceeded 2 billion livres, leading leaders to charge leading lenders to charge 10% interest. Now, even in modern times, if your credit score is low, the bank is less likely to give you a loan. The same occurred with the king. A large portion of the budget was spent on interest payments, leaving little for essential state functions. To cover expenses, the government increased taxes. Now, there was no other way to make more money out of nothing, so they had to increase the taxes and increase the burden on the people. The estate system and taxation. Now, taxing occurred in a system that was fixed. First estate, second estate, and third estate. The first estate consisted of clergy. Clergy was the people who worked for the church, mostly priests and other preachers. The second estate consisted of nobility. Nobles were those who had inherited this title from a long line of nobles before them. It was kind of a succession. And the third estate, the lowermost, big businessmen, merchants, court officials, lawyers, they were placed at the top of the third estate. After which came peasants and artisans. After which there were small peasants, landless labor, and servants. Now, French society was divided into these three estates. The first estate clergy owned land and were exempt from taxes, which meant they were never going to have to pay taxes in their whole lifetime. Second estate, nobility. They enjoyed feudal privileges, exempt from taxes again, and collected dues from peasants. The third estate, that is the commoners, included peasants, artisans, and the bourgeoisie, bore the entire tax burden. Now, the third estate was the only estate being forced to pay taxes by the king. Peasants were 90% of the population and had limited land ownership. The church collected tithes and the estate levied direct taxes, tithe, and indirect taxes on daily essentials like salt and tobacco. Now, the old regime. The old regime basically means the France of all the years before 1789. The old regime referred to the pre revolutionary social and political system of France, which was this three estates. The unfair tax structure and economic hardships fueled discontent, setting the stage for the French Revolution. Now, it basically said that peasants were bound to revolutionize. Now, let's look at these terms. Livre, unit of currency in France, which was discontinued in 1794. Clergy, group of persons invested with special functions in the church. Tithe, a tax levied by the church on peasants, comprising of one tenth of all of the agricultural produce. Suppose this person has made 100 grams of wheat, he will have to pay 10 grams worth of wheat as tax to the church. Tithe, tax to be paid directly to the state. Now, let's take a look at this sketch. This is given in our book. Here we have translations of these phrases. Now, we see here a peasant bringing a lot of grains, food, money, etc., to an already quite wealthy landlord. This poor fellow brings everything: grain, fruits, money, salad. The fat lord sits there, ready to accept it all. He does not even care to grace him with a look. The more the devil has, the more he wants. The nobleman is the spider and the peasant is the fly, as you can see. Now let's move to the next slide. Continued unrest in the countryside. Riots continued in the following days, primarily due to the high price of bread. And the historical significance was that it basically kick-started the start of the revolution. Now, a summary of the economic crisis in France, 1715 to 1789. Population growth and food shortage. Now, France's population increased from 23 million in 1715 to 28 million, a skyrocket in 1789. demand for food grains surged. It increased exponentially, but the production failed to keep up. Bread prices rose sharply. There was inflation, as it was the staple diet of the people. Wages and economic inequality. Now, most workers were employed in workshops where owners set their wages. Wages remained stagnant while prices soared, widening the rich poor gap. Now, if a person were to earn 10 livres and the price of bread was 5, he would still have 5 livres left over. Now, the price of bread skyrocketed to 10 livres and his wage still remained 10 livres, which caused him to go into an even more financial crisis. Frequent subsistence crises. Natural disasters like droughts and hailstorms further reduced harvests. Now, it was weather also that contributed to this shortage. Food shortages led to frequent subsistence crises, making survival difficult for the poor. These crises were common under the old regime, increasing public unrest. A growing middle class envisages an end to privileges. In the past, peasants and workers had participated in revolts against increasing taxes and food scarcity, but they lacked the means and programs to carry out full scale measures that would bring up a change in the social and economic order. This was left to those groups within the third estate who had become prosperous and had access to education and new ideas. Now, this was the few people at the top of the third estate which could even think of such a thing, as most were uneducated and unprivileged. Emergence of the middle class. The 18th century, that is the 1700s, saw the rise of the middle class in France. They gained wealth through overseas trade and manufacturing. Examples are woolen and silk textiles. This group included merchants, manufacturers, lawyers, and administrative officials. Beliefs and values of the middle class were mostly that they believed in merit over birth based privilege, as we can see in the first and second estates. Advocated for a society based on freedom, equal laws, and opportunities. Influence of the Enlightenment philosophers. Now, there were three main philosophers of the time that we will be studying about. Jean Locke. Jean Locke wrote the two treatises of government and rejected the divine right of kings. Jean Jacques Rousseau proposed that the government was based on a social contract, like it should be based on a social contract. Montesquieu. Montesquieu wrote The Spirit of the Laws and he suggested a separation of powers we see in modern day India into legislative, executive, and the judicial. The influence of the American Revolution. Now, the American Constitution and its focus on individual rights inspired the French political thinkers. Spread of new ideas. Now, Enlightenment ideas from these Enlightenment philosophers were shared in salons, coffee houses, and through books and newspapers. These were often read aloud for those who were illiterate, increasing public awareness. Now, those members of the third estate who knew how to read would go to these salons, coffee houses, and read these newspapers and these texts aloud so that the illiterate could also be aware. Growing public discontent. News of Louis the Sixteenth into News of Louis the Sixteenth's plan to impose new taxes sparked anger and protests. The demand for ending privileges gained momentum among the third estate. Now, that will be all for this video. Keep tuned to get to know more about this chapter in my next video that will be labeled as the same video, but it will be part 2. Now, uh, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment if possible, and it will quite help me if you were to subscribe to my channel if you found my video helpful. Now,